guys. So I had a couple questions that I'm going to run through that I posted in the chat too. But if anybody has any questions for Robby related to positioning their skill sets in this world where companies want full stack, I think let's try to limit it to talking about full stack and front end and how to position ourselves, because obviously we could just ask a bajillion questions to Robby about any topic. But if you have anything that you're not sure, throw it in the chat and I'll try to call on people. But then at some point we'll switch over and have you all ask questions because it's more fun when you talk. So sound good? Robby, anything you want to get into before we get started? Otherwise, I can ask my first question.
I guess should I just do a quick intro just so it's for the
Yeah,
people who
that's a
don't
good
know
call.
me?
Oh, also,
Yeah.
I'm Lexi. Yeah, I am this founder and CEO of Leopard. I should have done that too. Sorry. Hi, everyone. Okay, your turn.
Hi everyone. I'm Robby. He, him, she, her pronouns. I've been working with Leopard for, I don't know, like 1, 2, 3 years. I don't even know. Oh, a couple of years now.
Like in and out. We're all in and
Yeah,
out.
in and out. Yeah. And I am my day job is I am a director of developer, let's see, it changed now. It's developer experience at Oscar, health insurance company here in New York City. Prior to this, I was running technology at a small startup called Ephemeral Tattoo. And then before that, I was managing teams at companies like Glossier, Path.AI, etc. Worked at Wayfair for a little while, Liberty Mutual. So I've worked all over the tech industry. At first, as kind of like a back-end data architecture and for engineer, and then as a manager, and now as a director. Outside, I do a lot of career coaching and consulting and startup advising and all those kinds of fun things. Yeah, so a little bit about me, and yeah, I'm excited to get to chat with everybody. And if any in anything else that they want to talk about individually, you can always find me in the Leopard chat and just connect with me offline.
Totally. You also do some coaching too, if people ever want one-on-one support. That was sort of where we started. And then we keep going back to this workshop format just because I think you're a super qualified person to talk about what's fair and not in the interview process, what's real and not. And there's a lot of fake, or there's a lot of impossible standards that companies put out. There's a lot of, certain things that startups do that nobody will ever get through. And then there's things that we could all learn from and adjust. And I think you just tend to have pretty good nuance on this topic. And I feel like we're getting into this recurring trend now because this is our second one of like cracking the code, like cracking the X, right? Like cracking the code on certain aspects of the interview process, especially technical ones, which is honestly, from my point of view, a hard thing to get right. And we haven't done this stuff in Leopard as much as we should because of exactly those trade-offs. And so think of this, Robby doesn't have all the answers. I don't have all the answers, but this is hopefully going to be a nuanced discussion where you maybe get ideas on how to refine the positioning and approach to job search based on trends we're seeing. So, okay, great. Questions are coming in. I wanted to start with my first one. But please, if you have even a maybe question, throw it in the chat. It's more fun when you all ask questions. And honestly, my questions were just an attempt to summarize questions I'm seeing a lot in our slide. So, okay, we were basically going to just cover, like, I sort of started doing it a little bit, but like, can you put these trends into context, right? This full stack need, given the economy and the market, and when you have, various size engineering teams, I know companies used to look for full stack and then there was a bit more specialization and then it seems to be going back towards that. So any context you can provide on just some of the market trends and where we're at now, I think is a really good start.
Sure. So there's a lot of reasons why a company would prefer full stack over a backend engineer or a front-end engineer. And so rather than me just saying, I think a lot of people are tempted to just say, here's the reason why everyone's doing this. It's important to remember that every company is different and different companies in different industries, because tech is not really an industry, right? Tech is something that a lot of companies may be a part of, right? The retail industry, the e-commerce industry, the SaaS industry, healthcare, finance, gaming, etc. So many industries. are part of tech, or there are so many fractured parts of tech. And also then there's different size companies, right? There's startups that are really startups, 5, 10 people, 50 people. And then there's large companies, 5,000, 50,000 people, etc. So every company is going to have a different reason for why they might hire in certain ways. There was a very common model of front end team, back end team, infrastructure team. And that was when people were specialized. And there was a point in time where it was very difficult for someone to be a full stack engineer because technology was still so nascent. And what I mean by that was if you wanted to build a website, for example, to build a front end, you had to really know JavaScript through and through, and you need to know HTML through and through. And there was a lot of things that you needed to, that were very difficult to do and would take a lot of time and a lot of specialty to do that now have been abstracted. And so now we have React that componentizes things. We have HTML5, which is much better than prior HTML specifications and standards. And so it's easier for somebody to be able to do multiple things because so many libraries exist and technologies have kind of been built to make it more abstract, more high level to do any specific tasks. So it's one of the reasons why full stack engineering is more prevalent as a practice. But also that model of having a front end team, a back end team, and an infrastructure team, it doesn't necessarily scale with the business. It scales with a product maybe, but when a business now has multiple products and multiple lines of business, it doesn't really scale. So one thing that Spotify introduced was this idea of tribes, and Amazon and other companies have kind of had similar models where you have these small, as they call them, like two pizza teams, right? So small groups of people. That two pizza term means a team should be only as large as the largest team should be no more than like I think 5 or 6 people, so that they could each eat two pizzas and have enough food for the entire team. And what that means is that you should have people on that team that can do everything. So a small team that can build an entire product on its own, another team that can build an entire product on its own, et cetera. And so um, being full stack, of course, makes it a little bit easier because rather than saying, "Oh, I'm the backend engineer, I built an API, and I'm just going to throw that over the fence to the front end engineer who now is going to use it to build their front end," and there's kind of a divide between the two. Having people that can kind of flex in between those, it kind of just makes a little bit more sense, and it can be a lot easier to be more agile. And I mean agile in the actual term of being moving quickly and iterating. Um, that being said, that's one of the logical reasons why companies might go for full stack. There's also the idea, though, in the current economy, that companies are being asked to do more with less. Now, there's a million reasons why that could be happening. A lot of that is due to certain sectors of the economy not being as well funded as they used to be, whether that's through consumer trends, just people spending less money on certain things, or investors spending less money in certain areas. And so when I say that companies are being asked to do more with less, what I mean by that is that companies are being asked to continue to have that hockey stick growth that investors always want to see, but they're not being given the, $5 million seed rounds, that were just being handed out like candy 10, 20 years ago. And so rather than being able to just quickly hire 5 to 10 front-end engineers, 5 to 10 back-end engineers, and then a couple of infrastructure engineers, they may have the money to hire like 2 or 3 engineers. And so companies want to, now that they see that full stack is more prevalent and it's more common for people to be able to be full stack without having 10, 15 years of experience. Honestly, the idea of a full stack engineer existing with only like 2 or 3 years of experience back in like, the 2010s was just kind of like a joke. Like nobody could do that really. But now it's more common. So it's more appealing to companies to be able to say, oh, you can at least flex into a certain area, if not cover both or multiple areas on your own.
Totally. So there's kind of a couple questions that people are asking in the chat that mirror pretty well the ones I was going to ask you as well, which were, there's like, what should front end developers do, right? Like, how can they land full stack roles despite these obstacles? There's another one. I'm just going to read them all off, and I'll come back to the ones. Then there's the flip, right, the back end, like what should candidates be doing in regards to showing off the
Totally.
back end? Yeah, and so I think you might have, let's kind of cover those as you will, and then I'll keep peppering and follow-up questions from the group.
Yeah, I think something that worth mentioning there is, and this kind of moves on, like whenever somebody says that they're full stack, and I ask them to tell me about that, like if I'm interviewing and they say, well, here's what I know how to do on the back end, here's what I know how to do on the front, and I'm like, cool, what about the rest of the stack? And what I mean by that is there is the data layer, right? A database, data caching, like this, there are people whose entire job are administrating and building and monitoring and maintaining data layers. And that is an important part of the stack, as is infrastructure, right? Like, cool, you can build it. Can you get it live in production? Can you build and deploy? Can you monitor? Can you report on what's happening? Can you manage containers? Can you manage servers? Can you manage development platforms? Can you manage your GitHub repository? Like all of these are important parts of, and then the networking, of course, right? Things like DNS, load balancing. These are all things that are very important, and they're all part of the stack. When people say they're full stack, yes, front end and back end, or a better way I think of talking about is client side and server side or application layer are very like important, but there's the rest of it. And the reason I bring this up is that backend engineers, and this is something I'm kind of guilty of, it's very, I think, well, let me back up. It can be very hard for people to pick up the other part of the stack. Meaning, I was a server side engineer for a long time. I tried picking up client side coding and I was just bad at it, right? Like I understand JavaScript, I understand how to write it. I'm just not good at it. It's not something that I enjoy. It's not something that I'm very good at. But what kind of saved me as I started to grow in my career was learning other areas of the stack. Like I said, right now I'm running an infrastructure team. I've worked in data science. I've done a lot of data modeling, things like that. Um, and so backend engineers tend to be closer to these things. It's more common for you if you have a backend engineer and a front end engineer and you need a database spun up, you usually don't go to the person who's building the client side or the client facing part of the app or the front end. You go to the backend engineer. So they do get more of that experience naturally. In my experience, and again, I'm going to keep saying in my experience, it is harder for backend engineers to pick up JavaScript, React, front-end coding than it is for modern day front-end engineers to pick up the backend. That's not across the board, but it's something that's I think worth definitely thinking about, is that it's not easy either direction. However, backend engineers, they can more easily pick up other areas of the stack, so they kind of get a pass almost. So for front-end engineers, I always think just pick up something else, pick up some other way of making yourself not full stack but wider stack. There's the idea of the T-shaped engineer. T-shaped meaning if you think of all the different categories of engineering that I just listed out, you can do a little bit in most, if not all of them, but there's one part of the stack that you go really deep on. And so for a lot of front-end engineers, where I find them to actually be successful is to start picking up the front-end infrastructure. And so what I mean by that is, as a front-end engineer, start learning things like Webpack, start learning about how, server-side rendering is done, things that are done to support, things that are done to support the front end of your code, but are not necessarily just the back end, just building the APIs. Because you might find that you connect with that. Of course, if you can build APIs, great. My basic advice is, once you feel very strong in one area of the stack, find another area of the stack that you can connect with and that you can learn. It doesn't have to just be, oh, if I build a front end, now I need to build an API or server application. It can be things like infrastructure. It can be things like database caching, modeling, things like that. Learning AWS, everyone can benefit from learning AWS. Yeah.
I saw a question that somebody was saying, it's sort of along these lines, and it got a bunch of so the two with the most votes, one is the opposite question. So back to back end, I guess we could go into that, which is how does a backend engineer learn to be more full stack? And then there's a thematic question in both of these where it's like, should I be doing it as a personal project? Like, what if I'm not able to learn this at work? How do I still
Hmm.
round out my skill set?
Cool, great question. Let's start with I think that was Iris. Yeah, Iris's question. So even within the front end, it's not, and this is where like when people are like, oh, front end's so easy, you're just making buttons and shapes on a screen. Like that is the very far front of front end. That's not everything there is, as all the front end engineers here are like, yup, that part. Um, there's so much more to it. And so I think for backend engineers, try to start at the what I call the back end of the front end. So the data layer, right? Like how is data managed in a browser? Um, how is data stored in session variables in the local store? How does the front end interact with the back end? How does it call endpoints? Um, how does like for things like with React, like how does React handle state? Like Redux stores, like how do you handle state? So for me, when it comes to things like, you know, I can't do anything visual. I really can't. Like when I have built full stack applications, whether it's part of an interview process, a prototype at a company I worked at, or whatever, the front end looks like Web 1.0, like IRC chat. Like it's just terrible. It's just raw JavaScript, maybe um, with some, it's just really bad. Um, but where I focus on that is, okay, can it connect to my back end? Is it calling, passing the right data back and forth? So that's one area where I think a backend engineer can kind of start creeping towards the front end and learning things that are helpful. Because if you think about it, when you turn around to your front engineer and say, hey, here's the endpoint that I set up for you, they're like, wow, I'm having trouble calling that endpoint. I'm having trouble handling that data. You can sit with them and work with them on how to unpack that data. You don't necessarily need to say, and now here's how you represent it to the client, to the user, in a visually exciting way, unless that's something that's interesting for you. Really, I think what's important though is really to just think of all the different ways that we can write code. For me, that wasn't exciting. For me, what was more exciting was to learn about the database and to really learn how databases work, and then to learn about what kind of cool stuff can we do with data offline. And that's where I spent some time in my life as being a data scientist. And I was building recommendation systems when I was working at Wayfair, and that got into ML, or what we now call AI. Um, so it doesn't need to be front end. Now, if you're working at a smaller company, though, if you're working at something that's very client tech related, then yeah, doing like front end coding would be really useful. But if you're looking at like SaaS companies, I mean, there's not a lot of front end coding to be done in SaaS companies. I think it's another reason why some companies are leaning more full stack is that some of these companies, once they've built a design system, there's really not a whole lot of front end to be done, especially if the product is data. I mean, data and what we do with data. And if you think, I know people want to talk about AI. We talk about AI, like what is the front end to an AI application? I mean, go look at ChatGPT. It's literally less technological than most chatbots, right? It's just you put text in, you see text out. So you can imagine they needed one front end engineer for that, but quite a few more back end engineers. And so because the product is not something physical, tangible, or visual, it's the data, it's the API, it's the back end logic and the data science that's happening there. So I think that's just another reason why just doing the front end of the front end, just being able to handle and again, there's the back end of the front end. There's things like authentication, right? There's authorization. There's how do you make sure that you're not DDoSing your servers? There's all kinds of other things that happen in between. But if all you're doing is JavaScript, visual, and like the front end of React, then you're not, companies are going to see less of a value proposition in hiring you unless if you have other skills that you can deliver at some part of the stack as well. I think there was a second part of that question, but I totally forgot
Yes,
it.
no, you're totally fine. I kept jamming these questions together. So, the second part was people are wondering if they're not at a job currently, or like,
Mhm.
what are the ways to
Oh,
sort
yeah.
of, yeah, like
Geez.
get those skills
It's
if
the
you're not at
hardest
work?
because I always tell people like you learn skills when you're at work, right? Like when somebody will tell me, "Oh, I'm interviewing for jobs." and I'm a back-end engineer, and I think it would be great to learn front end. So how do I learn front end really quickly for an interview? I just tell them you're not going to, because that I tell like I would say to the let me flip this because I have a feeling that there's more front end engineers here based on the topic here. If people here are front end engineers and you say, quick, how do I learn enough back end engineering to be good at an engineering interview? I'd say, well, if I said to you, can you teach me how to be a front end engineer in a week or two for an interview? You'd be like, no, it's really hard. And that's really the answer is that if you spend a week or two or three or four even learning any trade for an interview, in the interview, it's going to be pretty obvious that you've only spent a couple of weeks learning that trade. And that's okay. That's just the reality. Um, what, and this is, again, this is my opinion. This is something that the caveat being that don't forget most interviewers suck at interviewing because they were never trained to interview. The whole other story. But what you really need to show in an interview is that you can learn these things on the job, that you know how to learn. I always say that engineering is every part of engineering is so wide and so big and changing constantly that if you just go into an interview and show them what you know, it's not really showing them who you are. You need to show them how you learn, how you stay up to date, how you find information. We can't hold all the information on how any given technology works. I remember when I first got into Flask, I asked somebody for a recommendation of a Flask book, and they turned around and said, yeah, I'll hand it to you. And I go grab my backpack, and he hands me a book that, like, literally, if I were to carry it home, I'd be hunched over today. It was like this big. And if anybody's ever used Flask, like, it is the most lightweight, API framework, RESTful framework that exists. But there's still just so much that you could possibly ever know. And that by the time that book got from the person's text editor to the publisher, it was already out of date. There's already more information out there that's missing. So it's not about what you know, it's about how you learn and how you gain this information. So I think it's more important to show somebody, um, you know, if you really want to demonstrate, hey, I'm going to build this basic API, explain to them, here's what I did. So rather than putting together a really good project, put together a shitty project. Put together really good documentation on everything you did every step of the way, how you made decisions, how you sought out information. Showing your process is worth way more than the API because, for me, I've built some pretty complex APIs in my career. So there's no way that somebody is going to build an API in a couple of weeks of learning how to do this or a couple of months of learning how to be a backend engineer that's going to impress me. It's just not going to happen because, like, I've seen APIs that people have spent years and years working on, but I will be impressed by you showing me in a document, day zero, I knew nothing. On day 10, I knew this much and this is how I got there. That's impressive as hell. Um, that's way more impressive than the actual content of the portfolio, in my opinion. And yeah, but at the end of the day, it's really hard. I was dealt with this with a coaching client because they said, I have an interview coming up and they want me to bring them a fully completed project and walk them through it. And I was like, well, that's insane because if you are an engineer, you write code for a company that owns that code. You can't then go and bring it to a company. And it's crazy to think that somebody on their weekend is just for fun writing code. That's not like some people do that. I don't. The only code that I have to show somebody that is not owned by a company is code that I wrote for an interview. So the advice, I think I actually went over this last time that we did one of these sessions when we were talking about take homes, is put a lot of effort into one project, into one take home project, and then show that to every other company. If Amazon asks you to do a take home or some startup asks you to do a take home, bust your ass on it, do a really good job. They don't own that code, you do. And then the next company says, well, now can you do a take home? Be like, no, I'm not doing that. I don't have the time. But here, look at this. Or if they say, hey, do you have any code you can send us? You can send them the code that you wrote and submitted to another company. That's absolutely okay. And it's even encouraged. It's code you wrote and it should be good. So um, yeah, other than that, I guess it can be kind of hard. I have had people, especially front-end engineers who, the thing about being a front-end engineer is that not all of your code is going to live on the internet, but if you write front-end code and you build a website and you go to something in your browser, you can see it and you can see a lot of that code. So, take really good screenshots and while you're working, before you're looking for another job, build a portfolio with screenshots and diagrams and whatever you can get away with. So that then, especially if that website is offline or if it's updated, by the time you get to the interview, you have it there.
There's a follow-up question. I think, Ria, this is your question. Tell me if I mess up asking it. It's basically kind of when you haven't been working in production code because you've been out of a software.
Alexa,
Do you
no,
want
I'm
to,
sorry. I had my mute button off. I really thought it was on.
Oh,
I
she's
don't
talking
know
to
why.
Alexa.
I'm
Because my
so
real name
sorry.
is Alexa, and I was like, okay,
Sorry.
I will. Okay, so this question was from Ria, and it was basically, what kind of projects can you work on besides the typical CRUD apps? Or is it where you should just start? It's also been hard to find good open source projects with real world problems to solve for experience.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love that you have clearly asked this question to other people before, because the answer is always find an open source uh, project, which like is amazing because it's like the easiest thing to say and the hardest thing to do. Like finding an open source project and actually contributing it to it is such a massive pain in the ass that I personally have never successfully done it. And so that if I'm telling you that I have gotten far in my career and I've never successfully contributed to open source that I can at least recall, then that should at least tell you something about that concept. Yeah, no, that's terrible advice. It's not terrible advice. Like if you can, like, let me get this, be totally honest. If you can get 1 or 2 contributions to an open source project, it will absolutely look amazing on your on your portfolio. It really will. I know somebody who has provided contributions to Kubernetes source code. And whenever they are interviewing and people are asking them about Kubernetes questions, they're like, just look at my contributions and leave me alone. So that does give you a lot of credit. That being said, it is very difficult. It's so I'll say a couple things. Number one, whenever one interview problem that people love to give and when they are interviewing you and asking you to do practicals, meaning like come in and write code for us, is to build a URL shortener. Now, as a result of this, there are about 1.5 million URL shorteners on the internet that all do the same thing and do it roughly the same way, and that's okay. So what I mean by that is you don't need to build a better mousetrap. You don't need to build something novel. You don't need to build something crazy, cool, and awesome and amazing. You can literally just build something that just whatever, it just gets something done. I once was hired by a small agency to build a Twitter board, meaning like people would tweet an event, people would tweet using a specific hashtag, and it would show up on like an admin panel. And if you accepted the tweet, it would then display it on a URL on like a page. Very basic. I did it in like Express.js. But when I was interviewing for jobs in Python land and I didn't have any code that I could show people, I went and I just rebuilt that in Python. Now, there are a million different open source Twitter boards out there. It's not that when I showed my code to people, they were like, well, I've seen code that does this before, so I'm not impressed. It just shows your process. So I don't know, build a to-do app. That's fine. Build whatever you want. Come up with something that showcases your capabilities. If you want to show how good you are at building APIs, then build, I don't know, find a project that has a cool API and build your own. It's okay to look out there and see what other people have done and then do it yourself. And in your own GitHub repository with your own Git commits, your own commit messages. And at the end of the day, it might be like if I squint my eyes at the code bases, they both look somewhat similar. That doesn't matter. The fact is you did it yourself, you wrote some tests, you took some screenshots, you took the time to do it. Don't go and copy paste the code, obviously. But the point is like if you're trying to just show like you're not trying to show somebody that they should hire you as a product manager because you can design like come up with the next best API that's going to make $1 million for the company. You're trying to show them that when somebody gives you a task, you can complete it. no matter how mundane and simple that task is. So whether it's, a website with, you want to build a cool responsive website, just, I don't know, make a website with like cooking recipes or something that you're interested in, right? Here's another thing I did. I'm interested in music. So I built, because I wanted to show somebody my Unix skills, laughing because they are laughable Unix skills. But I built a script that I could type new music into my terminal, and all it did was it sent a curl request to Pitchfork's website, got the reviews, and then just used Beautiful Soup, which is a Python library that parses HTML to show you what the top 10 latest bands and albums and the ratings were that they've reviewed. Again, super simple. Nobody would ever use that. It's not valuable. Not going to make money. It's not groundbreaking, but it shows that I know how to write a bash script. Shows that I know how to hit a website. It shows that I know how to parse things and take user input and provide responses. So don't put an obstacle in your way by saying, oh, I can build this, but it's not cool enough. Like, if you can build something, just build it. And then when you're done with it, move on. Don't be a perfectionist. Don't say, well, it's not perfect. It's fine. Just get something working or mostly working and then do something else. And that's how you build a portfolio. Don't think that you need everything in there to be perfect or everything to be, fully tested or fully featured. And any code is better than no code.
Love it. We have a couple of hands raised. Candace, you want to unmute and I'll unraise your.
Yeah, sure thing. Hey, Robby. So I just had a question regarding AI. It seems like it's super popular right now. There's a lot of startups that's also seeking engineers. So I just wanted to know like what your thoughts are on it, especially for new roles such as like prompt engineers. And do you think those who are struggling to find jobs should consider moving into AI, especially if you're looking for something just like a little bit more stable and not literally getting like laid off a year later?
Yeah. Oh boy. I was waiting for someone to get me started on AI. Okay. AI is not new. Back when I was doing data science, about 40, 50 years ago, because I'm so old. No, back when I was doing data science, we were told to call it machine learning, ML. And why were we told to call it ML? Because if I said artificial intelligence, people get scared and they're like, oh my God, it's like Skynet. This is scary. I hate it. But somebody whose name I won't say because I absolutely hate him and the companies that he has started, has decided to market himself and say AI now. And AI, everybody wants AI. This is absolutely similar to the blockchain craze, which, whenever people kept saying, oh, what about blockchain? Do I need to learn blockchain? The answer was, I unequivocally, I always said, no, don't. In fact, you should avoid blockchain because it is a dead end. It is a dead end technology. And I can go into that for a million different reasons. The things that you learn to build blockchains are useless. And when I see that on somebody's resume, I tend to ignore it in some ways because those are technologies that don't actually translate into what we do in any other areas of technology. Now, AI is a little different. Going back to the beginning of the conversation, why is everybody getting into AI? The reality is that everybody's getting into AI because it's an incredibly profitable grift. And I say that because if anybody here has ever actually used OpenAI, has ever actually built AI, it is 2 lines of Python code. And I'm not exaggerating. It's 2 lines of Python code to import OpenAI and use it. You do not need to know any code to become an AI entrepreneur. So companies are building up around this. Now, is it good to know machine learning? Absolutely. It's a great skill to know how to apply statistical inference to a set of data. Is it good to know how to train an LLM? Yes, LLMs are very useful statistical models. To be able to train them and to clean all the data and to get that into a model and then be able to actually put a prompt through that absolutely is useful. Prompt engineering is useful right now in that when I go into the office, I sit near somebody who gets paid to do prompt engineering. Is it a useful skill down the line? Probably not. In fact, you are more likely to get a prompt engineering job if you have an English degree than if you have a computer science degree, which I consider a win for the MFAs that I know, which is a one that they have needed for a long time. This is somebody who went to school for music originally. But my point is that it's a good thing to learn, but when you go to a company that is doing AI, most of their problems have nothing to do with machine learning. Most of the problems that they're trying to solve have everything to do with infrastructure, right? Because the reality is it is incredibly expensive. While, yes, you just install OpenAI and type 2 lines of code, it is still used, it does a lot of things on its own. This goes back to my conversation about how previously, in order to build something like ChatGPT, you would have needed like 3 PhDs and dozens of engineers and lots of stuff. Now you just need one engineer who can type import OpenAI. It has been abstracted out. So once we democratize that technology, everyone can use it, which is good and bad. So to build a career around it, no, I think that will actually, it seems like you also kind of, you mentioned Candace, like, if I get laid off a week later, do I have anything that's still useful? And the answer is I really don't think so. But if you can go to a company that's doing AI, I don't think it's a dead end technology. I think there are problems to solve there around infrastructure. How do we make it less expensive to run all of these servers? How do we do security engineering? The area of trust and safety. How do we prevent this model from spitting out things like, "Hey, kids, go drink bleach. It's good for you. It kills germs." And how do we prevent people from getting bad things into these models that would cause those things to come out? There's tons of great problems to solve there. So I don't think it's a bad idea to go work at one of those companies. But if you go there just saying, "Oh, I took a course on LLMs," you're probably not going to be um, very useful to that company. I think at the end of the day, there is no replacement for understanding the core fundamentals of software engineering, understanding data models, understanding algorithms. Like, while leak coding is not a great way to test those skills are still the ones that we all need. And knowing how to, prompt engineering, I say, is actually a skill that all engineers have always needed, and that's how to be good at Google, right? Like, when I'm interviewing somebody and they're stuck on something, I'm like, cool, what would you type into Google to get this answer? Because that's what makes engineers good. We all Google all the time. That doesn't end as an engineer. It's just who Google's better than whom is what I think is most important in getting you a job. So yeah, if you get an opportunity to use an API that has AI involved with it, yes, AI is sexy. The startup that I've been advising lately, I did tell them to build an AI feature simply for investors because it does get you investment money. But that's not the only thing that they do. They do so much more. And so I think same thing with engineers. I would guide you to, yes, it's good to learn about these things. It's good to understand these trends and be able to speak intelligently about them and not just in the curmudgeonly way that I'm speaking about it right now. But I do not think that dedicating your entire practice towards AI is what's going to make you a good engineer. And yes, these companies, the VC money will dry up. And if they do not have a model to be profitable, they're going to cease to exist in a couple of years, just like we're seeing with all the blockchain companies. And the worst part is this: there's no last thing I'll say here. So I could go on for the next 5 days. There's no competitive moat here. And in fact, the larger companies have the competitive moat. And what I mean by that is if it really is just that easy to build an LLM, if all these AI companies are just cropping up immediately, they only make money by selling what they do. And if there's not a lot of end user reason to pay for an AI company, companies like, CVS, Liberty Mutual, whatever, big companies will pay for it up until they just build it themselves. Because there's nothing stopping them from doing it. In fact, they will do it better because they have their own data. They have better data to train these models on than other companies do. And that's why the only reason that OpenAI is where it is because of the Microsoft deal. So yeah, I don't think that joining one of these startups is going to be a silver bullet to making you a great engineer for the rest of your career. But if you can get a well-paying job at one of them, great, but keep growing in other ways as well.
Thank you so much, Robbie. That's super helpful. And I'm pretty much hearing you say like it's good for right now if you need to check, but if you're looking for stability beyond like a couple of years and looking to level up, it could be like rolling the dice, essentially.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's something that's like very hot right now, but may not have much longevity. So thank you so much for laying that out, because I was thinking about just pivoting, even though I really don't want to pivot, but I was thinking about it. But this kind of helps me being like, you don't have to do a hard pivot. Like there's other things that you can do. And kind of just building on the skills you have now is going to be better in the long run than just running to the next new hot thing. So thank you so much for your insight on that.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say, and I'll link this right now in the chat. I was actually just talking to Lexi about this earlier today. There's a saying, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. Better saying that I like to choose boring technology. The things that are boring, the things that have lasted, that are old and have been around for decades, will continue to be around for decades. The things that are exciting are usually just flashes in the pan. Yeah.
Awesome.
Jerry has been patiently waiting, so,
All right.
Candace, anything else you wanted to share there, or should we move on? Jerry's question is also related to this stuff, or more of a comment. So, anything else, Candace?
Nope, nothing else. That was great. Thank you.
Perfect. You're up, Jerry.
Yeah. Hello again. I was in your last talk on take homes and it was amazing. I'm really curious. So since venture funding is really valuing AI right now, there's so many companies that now exist that they have like a different breakdown of teams than I think non-AI companies. So they have like a machine learning org and then like a platform org, and then sometimes they have like a customer facing or client org. As opposed to what you were talking about earlier with having separate like back end and front end and maybe infrastructure or security disciplines. So I'm curious if you have any advice for previously front end or back end folks who are trying to target roles in this like new type of company shape.
No, it's a great question. So I worked at a company called Path AI back in 2019, I want to say, somewhat around there, for like 2 years, I think. They had a similar breakdown to what you just described. They had an ML team, which, I mean, they had two floors. On the first floor was the ML team. That was what they did. They came in, they they got data ready to be trained. They hit train on a model, then they went out for a run and came back like half an hour later and looked at the results, or an hour later. Because that's just kind of what ML teams do. They spend, excuse me, a lot of time planning and a lot of time talking about the math behind it, and then a lot of time just kind of waiting for their models to train. And then they had the platform team, which was the team that built the technology that not only provisioned servers for these models to run on, because you have to spin them up, run it, and spin them down. Those servers, those are the ones that run on GPUs. Those are the ones that are doing a million mathematical processes per millisecond. They're big, they're beefy. So managing that and trying to spend as little money as possible, and then also providing the data pipelines to get the data out of the databases and into those servers, and then the results to store them somewhere. So that's what a platform team usually does. They're more infrastructure, but infrastructure application kind of cross. And then there's, as you said, the client teams. So the teams where they are building the APIs, they're building the platform that the customers would use to submit things that then get trained. In this case, it was images of like cell biopsies that would then get trained on our data and then have to be displayed. That company had really solid front-end engineers that were building essentially like a slide viewer, a microscope in browser. So there are still teams that do all these things. I mean, I was running a team that built APIs in Django, and we were solving really cool Django-specific problems, things around data governance, things around security, authentication, good data modeling, etc. Data tagging. So I would say that any company that in the AI space that is building a real product that is not purely a grift, we'll still have all those teams. They just may have slightly larger or much larger machine learning teams than they would front end teams, because that's what their product is the data. So the response to your question is, I don't really have an answer to that, because every company is going to be kind of different. There will always be a need for application and infrastructure engineers. If you want to make sure that you will always be employable by an AI company, because I think there will always be machine learning companies, there will always be AI companies. When people say AI today, they mean LLMs, which is like this tiny little part of artificial intelligence or machine learning, and there's everything else. If you really want to if that's where you want to be, then I would learn either platform engineering, meaning infrastructure and automating infrastructure, Terraform, AWS, Kubernetes, Docker, or I would learn how to be a machine learning engineer, which get really good at statistics is kind of the answer to that. And pick up a hobby like running or crossword puzzles or something to do while you're waiting for your models to train. The team played a lot of Super Smash Brothers. Yeah.
Oh, I think Michelle put her hand down. So I said we could do one more question. So I guess, Michelle, you can
I
ask
can go a
your
little
question.
bit over if we want to do too.
Oh, okay. I think Sue, feel free to unmute yourself.
Hello. Yeah, so just going
Sue.
back to what we spoke about earlier. So I'm primarily a backend engineer, and what I've been seeing is that like companies seem to be getting more strict about like, oh, you have to have like X years of experience in this particular technology. And I feel like maybe they used to be more flexible about tech stack, but now like I've gotten direct feedback like, oh, you do need to have X years of experience in this technology. And I feel like that would maybe be harder if you're like a front-end engineer wanting to transition into backend or vice versa in my case. So like of course it'd be nice if companies would appreciate like that we could learn new things, or like if portfolio projects were sufficient to change their mind. But I guess, do you have any advice about that, like companies being more strict about requirements, or we just have to
Yeah.
keep searching until we get lucky?
Well, I actually think it's easier for a front-end engineer then, because there are back-end technologies based in JavaScript. But there's no front-end technologies based in Python or Ruby. What I mean by that is I've seen jobs that I thought were really interesting, but because, as a manager, but they were entirely JavaScript front-end and back, and that just isn't a stack that I personally have a lot of experience with. Whereas, if you're a backend engineer and you want to do front end, but you don't have a ton of experience with Vue or with React, then you're kind of SOL. But that's, again, I totally see your point. And I think the issue here is, look, the reality is, and I will talk about this. I'll try not to talk forever about it. Boot camps and commercialized master's degrees have flooded the industry with candidates who know how to code at a basic level. Software companies hired and gave people 2, 3, 4, even 5 years of experience. Layoffs have been the way of life lately. And so now it is a buyer's market. And what I mean by that is, if I'm looking for a front-end engineer who is really good at Vue.js and has been doing that for a long time, and also has a little bit of experience with Python, I'm going to find, and I put a job up, by the end of the week, I'm going to have 300 applicants that fit that profile. And if I say, well, I don't care, I'm now going to have 3,000 applicants by the end of the week. And so it actually, where that companies being more strict on those numbers, years of experience, which I hate years of experience. I don't put years of experience on my job descriptions. It pisses me off. It doesn't make any sense. I would rather find somebody who's really good at the technology, who got really good at it in 1 year, than somebody who got just as good, but it took them 5 years. I mean, that's just logic. But we're asking people to think logically, and that's unfortunately not where we are right now with the industry or with the world. But that's another conversation. But my point being, it's a screening technique. It's a way to cut down the number of applications that they have to look through and look through critically. So yeah, people, because you can be more selective, people will be more selective. And so that's an answer as to why I think that is happening. What is my advice to you? Well, it's kind of the same advice that I give to everybody when it comes to picking a job. A job that you take should be 50%. I know I can do this. I got this. I can come in and deliver this value. 25%. I'm going to have to work my butt off and get some help, but I will get comfortable with this after a while. And 25%, I have no fucking clue how I'm going to do this. That's where the growth happens, right? So my advice to somebody is, if you are a front-end engineer and front-end engineering is what you do, and you have zero experience with back-end engineering, zero experience with any other area of the stack, it's going to take longer maybe, and you might not get a job that's exactly what you want, but find a job that lets you do that. Find a job that lets you be a front-end engineer and get experience with other areas of the stack. So if you can get a job and you stay there for 2 years, and during that 2 years, you spend maybe 20 to 25% of your time working in Python, you now have 2 years of Python experience. Might not be the 2 years of Python experience that you think that you need to have, but let's be honest, nobody's truly honest when they say, oh, I have 2 years of, what does 2 years of Python experience mean? Does it mean every day I write Python for 2 years? No. It means 2 years ago I wrote some Python, and yesterday I wrote some Python. Great, that's 2 years right there. As Christina just mentioned, just apply. There is, and I'm not going to go look up the study. There have been studies done that when people put those requirements, the only people that don't apply to those jobs are people from underrepresented groups. The people from the highly represented groups will say, oh, they want 5 years of experience of something I only have a year and a half of. Apply. Everybody on this call is going to say, I don't qualify for this, so therefore I won't apply. Let them say no. It's not on you to say no. And bullshit them. You worked at a company for 3 years and you only did Python for 4 months. Great. You have 3 years of Python experience, whatever, 2 years, whatever you feel like saying. It doesn't matter. Just get the job. But yes, get the job, learn on the job, and then, make sure that your next job doesn't just keep you in that cycle of only doing front end. But yeah, I mean, I'm not saying go to a job and say, yes, I have 2 years of Python experience, when all you did was spend a week reading Python documentation or Python tutorials. You are setting yourself up to fail. If you can do that, good for you, go for it. But that could just turn out very badly, and you'll just be back on the job market again.
Okay, thank you so much.
I'm gonna stop us there. I posted what Michelle's question was. It was a great chat, but it's gonna open up a whole new can of worms. I posted it, and we can come back to this another time, or the next time, like the future of infra and what to know. Thank you so much. Hopefully this workshop was helpful. Let us know in Slack, like DM Robby if this was helpful for you. It's always great to get positive words, or send the positive words to Robby, and if you have any constructive criticism, send it to me. But
no, I want to know how to serve you all best.
And then I'll at least share it with Robby. But I'm hoping that we can keep doing this stuff. I think it's like an unbelievably invaluable advice, and as you all can hopefully see, Robby really kills it when it comes to the nuance of this stuff, and like what's because it's not obvious. So thank you all so much.
Thank you all for coming. Really quick, just because Lexi told me I need to plug myself. I do career coaching, people who are for both job seekers as well as, for people who are looking to pivot in their career, people who have jobs and want to get promoted and things like that. So my schedule's a little stacked right now, but I do have some openings. So if you're ever looking for, some advice in your career or some way to grow, just hit me up. Would love to chat. Or if you just have any questions, just Slack me. I'm in the Leopard chat. I always love to chat.
Love it. I'll post it too in Slack. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Bye.